Now, what do we mean by the seven rays? Well, in the Theosophical tradition, the seven rays are a metaphorical way of talking about seven primordial forces in the universe, energies in the universe, which combined bring all things into existence. The rays are in all of us, all seven of them. They are in everything in the universe, every object, every tree, every animal, every stone. But the rays tend to be present in varying proportions and combinations, and that makes for individual differences. In fact, what I'm going to do is to give a kind of brief overview of the nature of the rays, but always with the subtext that a balance of the rays is necessary for a successful personal life and for a peaceful world. And that when rays become unbalanced and one ray or another becomes not just dominant but dominating, then we have a fracturing both of our personal wholeness and of international peace. There's a handout which I trust you have got, and you will find on it a bibliography of some works about the seven rays. There have been many, many books written, but here are some of them. Madame Blavatsky began the theosophical concept of the seven rays, particularly in her major work, The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888. But what she does there is to bring them in almost incidentally to other things she's talking about. She does not give a coherent or comprehensive treatment of the rays anywhere in any of her writings. In fact, the most important writer on the subject of the seven rays was Ernest Wood, who wrote a book called The Seven Rays, and that is the major source for all treatments of the seven rays that have been made ever since. So if you really want to get a book about the seven rays, get Ernest Wood. It's the most comprehensive and the best. Now, the rays are obviously a metaphor. They are a metaphor drawn from the rainbow. As the rainbow traditionally has seven colors in it, and that is only traditional because, as most of you will know, the rainbow is a continuum of colors because it's a continuum of vibrations. But we traditionally divide those into seven, and that gives us the basis for this metaphor of the seven rays. Now, although the theosophical concept of the seven rays is relatively recent, dating from the late 19th century, in fact, you can find it in ancient mythologies, in very many of them. For example, the Christian mythology of seven archangels. These are personifications of the seven rays. And other such personifications are that found in the Hebrew tradition of the Kabbalah, of the seven Sephirith. For those of you who know a little about the Kabbalah, why, those are the lower seven, not the three higher ones. We also find that same personification in a Hindu tradition of seven rishis, or wise men. And Madame Blavatsky says of these that the seven rishis were the primal makers of creation. We also find it in Buddhism and in some theosophical terminology as seven Dhyani Chohans or Dhyan Buddhas. We find it especially in Zoroastrianism, which talks about the Ameshaspentas, or the holy immortal ones, of whom there are seven. And it is probably from that Zoroastrian bit of mythology that the Christian notion of archangels comes. And my favorite mythological explanation of or embodiment of the seven rays are the Japanese seven gods of good luck. And they are my favorite ones because they are in many ways the most graphic. So here's a Japanese print showing the seven gods of good luck, and I'll just point them out. Some of you. That's the god of longevity. and that's the god of boating and of fishing. And that's the god of food. And that's Hote, the laughing Buddha. And that's the god of scholarship, and that's the god of who's the guardian of the gods. And finally, we have only one woman, a goddess, who's the goddess of music. I think it's rather delightful to think that these are the basis of all civilization. And so we have the 7 gods of good luck in a boat, the boat of civilization, traversing the waters of life. Now, the traditional way of talking about the 7 rays in Theosophy is to list them in a list and to give them numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's fine, but there are certain problems with it. And one of the problems is that the 7 rays are not just 7 different things that follow one another. They, in fact, sort of form groups. They are clumps. They form contrasting pairs. And so one of those contrasting pairs consists of the 1st and 7th ray. These are, in a way, mirror images of one another. Another is the 2nd and the 6th. Still another is the 3rd and the 5th. And that leaves the 4th all by itself, right? Poor little 4th, nobody to bond with, nobody to form a connection with. Not to worry. In fact, the 4th bonds with all of the other 3 pairs. Right? It's the middle one, and it forms a connection with the other sets of rays, the other 3 sets. Now, also, just using the numbers, if you know the Theosophical tradition, the numbers are fine. Betty talked about 7th ray up here, and I agree with her. I am very 7th ray. My academic field was grammar, and grammar is very 7th ray. But I think it's nice to have some names to associate with. So what I have done is simply to assign a name to each of the rays, and the names are characteristics that are prominent in those rays. They are not the only possible names. They are not the only characteristics that are prominent. And as a matter of fact, I have gone through a series of steps in which I keep changing my mind about what names to assign. But I've got a set here which I will hold with for this evening at least. The first ray is the ray of freedom. The 7th ray, which contrasts with it, is the ray of order. And don't you see that those are contrasting pairs? Order is a limitation on freedom, and freedom is a violation of order, right? So these two go together as contrasting opposites. The 2nd ray is the ray of compassion. Now, the 6th ray is usually called the ray of devotion, but I'm going to be really heretical here, and instead I'm going to call it the ray of passion. And that goes, of course, partly with compassion, right? And if you stop to think about it, those two form an interesting pair, because passion is something where I am centered on myself, but compassion is something where I am centered on others. The 3rd ray I'm going to call the ray of wisdom, and the 5th ray the ray of knowledge. And those two are an interesting, contrasting pair. You can be wise without knowing anything. And you can have lots of knowledge without being wise. Wisdom and knowledge are 2 different things. And then finally, the 4th ray is the ray of harmony, because it's in the middle of all of the others, and it is going to link all of the others together. All right, now, having given some names to the 7 rays and having suggested to them that they form pairs, I'm going to suggest that we might also reconsider the manner in which we think about the rays. Instead of giving them as a list, I'd like to suggest that we can put them on a hexagon. The hexagon is one of the most basic shapes in the universe, plane shapes. You all will know what shape is a snowflake? It's hexagonal, right? No 2 snowflakes are alike, but every one of the infinite number of snowflakes in the universe is hexagonal. It's a really basic shape. Have you ever noticed tiles on the floor? What is a very common pattern for tiles on the floor? Hexagons. And that's because they fit together into an overall pattern very, very neatly. So let's put the 7 rays on the hexagon. The first ray of freedom I'm going to put at the top. And then the 7th ray of order, which contrasts with it, at the bottom. We'll put compassion on the right hand of freedom. You may say, no, that's the left, but think about it looking out, right? And contrasting with that, we will put passion on the left hand of order. We'll put wisdom on the left hand of freedom and knowledge on the right hand of order. And then in the very center, we will have harmony. So this is the diagram of the rays which I'm going to work from this evening. Now, what I'm going to do now is to consider each of the rays briefly with some characteristics of those rays. The first ray is the ray of power, of choice, of innovation. Its iconic figures are the hero and the ruler, and there's some others we will see. If you think about first ray people, remember that song of Frank Sinatra's, I'll Do It My Way? That is a first ray song. And Frank Sinatra was a very first ray person. Whatever you think about our present president, and we will not voice opinions here from this platform, nevertheless, what did he say about himself recently? I am the decider. I make the decisions. He's very first ray. All right? The rays are neither good nor bad. All right? The rays are just what they are. They are forms of energy which can be used for good purposes or for bad purposes. All right, let's look at some graphic images which are first ray. The planet of the first ray is Jupiter, and he's also one of the gods of the first ray, the ruler of the heavens. In Hindu mythology, in the Hindu Trimurti, Shiva is the god of the first ray. Shiva dances the universe into and out of existence. He's in complete control of everything. As a kind of iconic beast, we could take the winged lion, the lion with the wings of an eagle, because the eagle is the first ray bird and the lion is the first ray animal. And so we combine them. First ray is the ray of rulers. And so we'll take the royal crown and stretching from Elizabeth I on the right to Queen Victoria on the left, rulers belong to first ray. But so do astronauts, so do discoverers, explorers, whether they be astronauts or whether they be conquistadores. Also, first ray is someone like a political revolutionary. Who is that? Anybody recognize him? The liberator of South America? Simón Bolívar. And so also is first ray someone like Annie Oakley. There was a delightful television program about Annie Oakley on just the other night. And she was a great competitor and a great first ray person. And finally then, inventors, like Thomas Alva Edison, who was a member of the Theosophical Society, actually. All right, so these are the kind of people you get, or the kind of activities or foci for the first ray. Let's move on to seventh ray. We'll do these in terms of the contrasting ones. The seventh ray is the ray of order. It is concerned with a path which leads someplace, with form, tradition, ceremony, etiquette. Examples of seventh ray activities or occupations are the architect, the builder, and the ritualist. Now some graphic images. Venus, the moon is the planet of the seventh ray. And so I have here a female figure representing perhaps Isis with the baby Horus, or the Virgin Mary with the infant Christ. The ritualist, and here I have an Egyptian ritualist, is seventh ray. For an animal, the winged ox. Oxes are concerned with the earth, right? But this ox has wings, so it can fly from the earth upwards. And this is very seventh ray activity. Mandalas and labyrinths are seventh ray because they are all form. Also seventh ray is something like the Japanese torii, or gate, which leads to the temple. Plato said there were 5 primary solids, the 5 Platonic solids, out of which everything was made. And that's a very seventh ray concept. You make things in the seventh ray according to patterns and according to limited resources. Writing is seventh ray because it's reducing language to a form. The Japanese tea ceremony is very seventh ray because its whole purpose is to carry out what is an ordinary action, but in a very precise fashion. In Egypt, Egypt is very seventh ray, and in Egypt what you have is the heavens being separated from the earth by a human being. Separated or joined, or both. Also seventh ray are architects and builders. And especially seventh ray is Freemasonry because it uses the symbols of architects and builders to promote in a ritual action. All right, let's move on to the second ray of compassion. Its keynotes are unity, equality, wholeness, and its archetypal figures are the sage and the teacher. And this is the religious teacher. Its planet is Mercury. It's also concerned with healing. And Mercury, you know, carries the caduceus, that staff, winged staff, and that's the symbol of medicine. Its great religious figure is the Buddha, who is the teacher par excellence, and the wheel of the law, which is the great compassionate statement to human beings, which the Buddha brought. In Hinduism, the divine figure is Brahma, and in Greece we might also say Athena, goddess of wisdom, belongs here. But in general, all gurus, all religious teachers of all kinds belong to this ray, and even more importantly, all of us do, in a sense, because the seventh ray is concerned with equality, harmony, and connection, wholeness. All right, move on to this contrasting one, the sixth ray, which I have chosen to call the ray of passion. And incidentally, passion here means a dedication of oneself to something. The keynotes of this ray are loyalty, obedience, devotion, and hierarchy. And its iconic figures are the devotee and the prophet. Who thinks that loyalty and obedience is enormously important? Soldiers, the military. And so the god of this, the planet of this ray is Mars. And of course, he is also then the god of the ray. And it includes then all military activities. Incidentally, there was an article in the New York Times just a week or so ago, which was about those generals who had complained about the Secretary of Defense, and people got all upset about this because if you are in the military, you aren't supposed to complain about orders that come down from on high. And this article pointed out something which is, I think, very characteristic of sixth ray generally, but especially of the military. The conflict, said the article, and the conflict is about whether or not such criticism by military men of their superiors is ever justified, right? This conflict, the conflict some officers express reflect the culture of commander and subordinate that sometimes baffles the civilian world. No class craves strong leadership more than the military. And this is very sixth ray. But it's not just the military. Certain kinds of religion are sixth ray. And this is especially the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Historically, Christianity and Judaism got considerably modified, and we'll say a word about that later. But Islam continues to be very strongly sixth ray. It is the strongest sixth ray religion in the world. What does the word Islam mean? Submission in Arabic. So obedience is the great keynote here. But you get it also in Christianity. You get it in Judaism, but to somewhat lesser, and for that matter, it's not even limited to entirely to the Abrahamic religions. Within India, the Bhakti tradition is sixth ray. And that is, of course, the tradition of devotion. But what are you devoted to in the Bhakti tradition? To your guru. And you do whatever the guru says without question. Right? That's very, very sixth ray. It's also business. Right? In business, what do? You do what the head man says. Right? Even if the head man has delusions of Napoleonic grandeur. And you're only a poor worker in the field. You still do what you're told. It is also the ray of government. It is the ray of all faceless bureaucrats. It is the ray of all spooks like the CIA. And it, of course, is also the ray of, remember, no ray is good or bad in itself. It's also the ray of devotion to country, which is symbolized in the United States by good old Uncle Sam. Right? The sixth ray is very slow to change. All right, let's move to the third ray, wisdom. Wisdom involves progress towards perfection, purpose, humaneness, prudence. And prudence is practical wisdom. It is wisdom applied in everyday affairs. This wisdom is not something abstract. It's something you live. And the philosopher and the philanthropist are said to be its archetypal figures. The planet of the third ray is Venus. Its Hindu god is Vishnu. The great teacher of the third ray, the ray of wisdom, was Confucius. Confucius was a remarkably third ray person. It is the ray of all scholars and hence of books. But it is not just abstract wisdom, it is wisdom applied, the wisdom of the philanthropist. And so the Good Samaritan is a third ray figure, because what the third ray wisdom does is to help us climb the stairs to a higher state, and it helps us to answer the questions that puzzle us. All right, it is complemented by the fifth ray of knowledge, and that ray has as its keynotes discrimination, research, causation, testing, and its archetypal figures are the scientist and the engineer. Its planet is Saturn, and so here we see Saturn surrounded by the hours of the clock in Roman numerals, and by stars. Saturn, or Cronus, to give him another name, a Greek name, is the god of time and of space. It is the ray of scientists like Albert Einstein, who was a theoretical scientist, but also of ordinary laboratory scientists. But it is also the ray of technology, of engineers and of technicians. It is the ray of detectives who search out things, who try to find out, what was that line from that old television program? Give me the facts, ma'am, just the facts. That's very fifth ray. It is also then the ray of some of the old Greek philosophers, including someone like Aristotle, who were concerned with establishing facts. Now we'll move on to the fourth ray, the ray of harmony. It is the ray, it has as its keynotes acceptance, life, creativity, growth. It is the ray of artists, of statesmen, diplomats, and of jurists. Its planet is the sun, which gives life. Right? One of the great Greek gods associated with it is Apollo, who is the god of the sun, but also of music, harmony, right? In Hindu lore, the figure which embodies the fourth ray is Krishna. And Krishna is both a child and a lover and a warrior. He harmonizes all of those different aspects. And the great book about Krishna is, of course, the Bhagavad Gita. And the Gita has been called a work of harmony, a harmonizing book, because it brings together different approaches to life and attempts to harmonize them. I think I should say here perhaps a word about, well, no, wait, I'll say it in a moment. Let's get some more pictures up first. It is the ray of the yin-yang, right? The Tai-Chi of China. Male and female, dark and light, all of these things which have to balance to be in harmony. The fourth ray is the ray of art, whether it is the art of the sculptor or the painter or the dancer or the musician, because all art aims at a kind of harmony. But it is also the ray of the jurist. What does a true jurist do? Attempts to harmonize conflicting points, right? Who is the great jurist in the Hebrew tradition? Solomon. And we talk about Solomon's decision, right? Which is to find a way of solving a problem in a harmonious way. It is also the ray of diplomats and indeed of true politicians. We have come to use the word politician in a negative sense, but a true politician is someone who promotes the interests of the state, of the city. That's what polis means, a city, and a politician is someone who promotes the city. That is a civilization. And the true politician has to compromise because you have to arrive at some kind of harmonious relationship. All right, now my little story about harmony comes from the Confucian tradition. Although Confucius was very strongly third ray, Confucianism is very strongly fourth ray in certain respects. There's a wonderful Confucian story. A Confucian scholar once came to one of the dukedoms of which China consisted in ancient days and got into a conversation with the duke of that dukedom. And the duke was complaining to him, I have no ministers I can really relate to. I have only one minister, Chu, who is harmonious with me. And the Confucian scholar said, what do you mean? Chu is not harmonious. He merely agrees with everything you say. And the Duke said, agreement? Harmony? Aren't they the same thing? And the Confucian scholar said, oh, no, 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 no. Harmony is like making a pot of soup. You begin with water, and to the water you add vegetables, and you add spices, and you add herbs, and you simmer it all, and then you taste it. And if it's a little too weak, you add more spices. And if it's a little too strong, you add more water. And you keep on in this way until you have achieved a perfect harmony of all of the ingredients, and then you have a pot of soup. You do not make soup, said the Confucian scholar, by adding water to water. Chu agrees with you. The business of a minister in the Confucian tradition was when his ruler said something which was wrong, which was bad, the minister was obliged to point out what was wrong with the proposed action. Needless to say, Confucian scholars were not popular ministers in China. When the minister said something which was right, which was good, it was the duty of the minister to remind him of what dangers were latent in that action. Right? Always trying to achieve harmony, balance, by looking at both sides of every question. That's very, very fourth ray. All right, now what I have done is to arrive at some mottos of the seven rays drawn from theosophical writings. And these are on your handout because I'm going to go through them rather quickly, but I think we will have time to look at them briefly. Motto of the first ray, the ray of power: we are each our own absolute lawgiver, the dispenser of glory or gloom to ourselves, the decreer of our life, our reward, our punishment. That's one of the three truths of the White Lotus. Don't you think that sounds very first ray? Second ray, the ray of compassion: the principle that gives life dwells in us and around us, is undying and eternally beneficent, is not heard or seen or smelt, but is perceived by those who desire perception. Another truth of the White Lotus. Third ray, wisdom: the human soul is immortal, and its future is the future of a thing whose growth and splendor has no limit. Another White Lotus truth. This is very third ray, because third ray is concerned, the ray of wisdom, is concerned with moving toward perfection. Fourth ray, harmony: the blessed Lord said, however people approach me, even so do I welcome them, from the path they take on every side is mine. That's the ray of harmony. Fifth ray of knowledge: all knowledge is useful, and one day you will have all knowledge. But while you have only part, take care that it is the most useful part. That's a very fifth ray, and it's from At the Feet of the Master, one of the little theosophical spiritual classics. Useful knowledge. Sixth ray: a willing obedience to the behests of truth, once we have placed our confidence in and believe that teacher to be in possession of it. That's from a document written by Madame Blavatsky called The Golden Stairs. Very sixth ray. And finally, seventh ray, a statement found on Madame Blavatsky's desk after her death, of unknown authorship: there is a road, steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. The notion of the road, the path, the way of doing something, the form to follow, is very seventh ray. All right, now the seven rays also correlate with the human principles. According to the theosophical tradition, we have seven aspects to our nature. And I'm not going to take time, don't have time this evening to go into these in any great length, but let's look at them very briefly and relate them to the rays, because they do correspond. One of the principles is, I'm giving you both the Sanskrit name and an English translation, is Atma, or the self. Who I am, the sense of identity within us. And that's the very first ray. Buddhi, or the intuition, which sees into the unity of all things, is very second ray. Buddhimanas, or deep mind, is wisdom ray. Whoops, got in two of them there, didn't I? Kamamanas, or surface mind, which is the mind we ordinarily use in figuring things out and dealing with facts, is fifth ray. And then kama, or emotion, is sixth ray. And finally, the linga sharira, or the etheric form, which is said to be the model on which the physical body is created, is the very seventh ray, and that leaves us only with the fourth, and the fourth ray is prana, or vital energy. And that's associated with the sun, and the sun is the planet of the fourth ray. These all hang together. In fact, about this, Ernest Wood had a very interesting comment about prana. He said that wherever we focus prana, the life energy, that's where we identify ourselves. He said most people, most human beings, focus their prana in the physical body, and so they think they are the physical body. Those who have entered on the path, said Ernest Wood, center their prana in what is called the antakarana, or the link between the lower self and the higher self. And that's why we have it here, right here in the very middle with fourth ray. And they center it there because they are in the process of converting their connection with the lower self into a connection with the higher self. Those who have reached the end of the path, said Ernest Wood, focus their prana in the monad. And the monad is something not even in this hexagon. It's above it. It's outside of it. They have realized. They are the masters. It's also the case that the seven rays coordinate with human cultures. And we'll talk about this rather briefly, just to give you an idea of what's involved. The first ray of freedom was characteristic of ancient Brahmanism, of Hermeticism through the Middle Ages, and of modernism. The West is very first ray, and America in particular is very first ray. What did the Declaration of Independence say that all human beings are entitled to? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Very first ray, particularly that liberty part. On the other hand, the seventh ray, the ray of order, was very characteristic of ancient Egyptian culture, of Japanese Shinto culture, and of Freemasonry in the West. The ray of compassion is very much characteristic of Buddhism, but also of Sufi within the Islamic tradition. Passion is the Abrahamic religions. I've mentioned this, particularly Islam, but also the Bhakti tradition in India. The third ray is Confucianism, very much so, and it is also humanism, so that the Renaissance in Europe, which promoted humanistic studies, was very third ray. The fifth ray is the scientific revolution, beginning with Galileo and Copernicus and going on right up to good old Einstein. That leaves only the fourth ray. And the fourth ray is modern Hindu, or traditional Hinduism, which begins about 500 BC, and Hellenism, ancient Greek Hellenism. Now, the history of the West is interesting because Western culture begins with a marriage of Hellenism and early Christianity, which was very Abrahamic. So modern Western culture begins with a merger of the fourth and sixth rays, and they don't go together very well. So an inherent conflict is created. And what happens is that there is a kind of revival of the third ray forces in the West, the humanism in the Renaissance, but then also by the 17th and 18th centuries, the rise of the scientific revolution, and finally by the 18th century, the great revival of first ray influence in the West with the American Revolution, the French Revolution, all of these emphasis on, what was the motto of the French Revolution? Liberty, equality, fraternity. But liberty is first, right? So this notion of freedom, very, very strong. All right, the 7 rays then in this diagram are all shown connected with one another, and that is exactly right. Every ray connects with every other. The rays are not separate. They are all joined together. If we want to have peace in our lives, our personal lives, we have to balance the rays in our own lives. If we are devoted to freedom, we have to learn how to moderate freedom with order. Freedom without order is chaos. Everybody doing whatever he wants. It's also egotism. I am the important one, right? No one else matters. So we have to balance that with order. On the other hand, order without freedom is determinism and formalism. It is simply an empty set of forms restricting us. Compassion without passion is sentimentality and anarchy. But on the other hand, passion without compassion is selfishness and tyranny. The 6th ray says you do what you're told, right? That's the obedience ray. Wisdom without knowledge is dogmatism and self-deception. I am wise, I know what is best. But on the other hand, knowledge without wisdom is pedantry and Faustianism. Faustianism is the way Faust behaves in the great myth of Faust. That is to say, he is willing to do anything he wants to achieve the ends he wants without ethical guidelines. Well, you would say, but then certainly harmony has no possible bad applications. Not so. Harmony without opposites to balance is dilettantism and indecisiveness. So in order to have peace in our personal lives, we have to take whatever characteristics there are for our personalities and balance them with the opposites and work at developing that kind of balance. And the same thing is true of international affairs. Part of our problem today, the great international conflict today, is between Western thinking, typified by America. And I'm not being triumphalist in saying that, it's just a fact, on the one hand, and Islamicism on the other. And by Islamicism, I mean fundamentalist Islam. What is the keynote of the West? We've already said freedom, liberty, lack of restriction. In economic theories, capitalism is first ray, right? You do what you want, right? What is the dominant theme of Islam? All Islam, obedience. Are obedience and freedom, in a sense, not harmonized? So the present conflict is not really a conflict about territory, about oil, about anything of that sort, about money. The present conflict is a conflict about visions, about values, about what is important in life. Now, what is important in life is loyalty. 6th ray is obedience, but it's also loyalty. What is important in life? Loyalty or freedom? The answer to that is don't ask stupid questions. They are both valuable. They are both necessary, but they have to be both achieved in a balanced state and not a dominating state. So that I think that the only thing that is important is what I want, what I have determined and willed. That's first ray gone wild. Nor is the only thing which is important doing what the imam says, following the rules of the sharia, the traditional rules of behavior. Both of those are unsatisfactory. So we have to learn how to both appreciate the other point of view and, more than that, to incorporate it into our own lives, both personally and internationally. The fourth ray, the ray of harmony, the ray which is governed by the planet, the sun, has to be central. It is there that we need to develop the concept of harmony. And if we do that, if we develop this concept of harmony within ourselves, we can be free from the conditioning which our society puts upon us and our past puts upon us. We can be orderly in our lives, both personal and governmental. The government does not have the right to do whatever it wants to do. The government has to follow the laws, the order of society. We can have compassion towards others, but we can be passionate in our adherence to the right. There's nothing wrong with passion, right? Passion gets a bad name. It shouldn't. Passion is good. Passion is the impulse to do something, right? And it's whether the impulse is directed towards good things or bad things that makes passion good or bad. We will be wise in our actions, and we will be knowledgeable in our thinking. And if we develop that kind of balance in ourselves, then each ray will be an emanation from the sun of the one reality, making a rainbow of truth, beauty, and goodness. And that is the key, both for personal wholeness and for world peace, to come into a harmonious relationship within ourselves and between ourselves and all others. And thank you.
A short question and answer session followed. First question. If someone has a ray that is dominant, then will its opposite ray almost always be weak, or can they both be strong?
There is, let us say, a tendency for, whenever one ray dominates, there is a tendency for the compensatory ray, the opposite ray, to be weak. But it doesn't have to be that way. If one works through harmony, one can develop both of them. I'll give you a good example of this, I think, from my own experience. I come out of a university background. I was a teacher of English. Universities generally have their faculties divided into two groups: arts or humanities and sciences, right? And humanities and sciences are always at war with one another because, in fact, sciences are knowledge-oriented. They're fifth-ray knowledge-oriented. And humanities are third-ray wisdom-oriented. If you're going to have a really great university, which do you need? Strong science departments or strong humanity departments? The answer to that is don't ask silly questions. You can't have a great university without having both. If you've got only strong science departments, you don't have a university, you've got an institute of technology. If you don't have strong science departments, you don't have a university. What you've got is a liberal arts college. Now, there's nothing wrong with either one of those things alone, but they don't make a great university. You've got to have the combination. My own field was, and I just drifted into it. I didn't intend to do it, but But I ended up in the field of linguistics. Now, linguistics is not speaking many languages, right? When people ask me, what languages do you read? I often answer what a favorite teacher, undergraduate teacher of mine used to answer to that question, which was one, but only with great difficulty. Linguistics is not the mastery of many languages. It is the study of the structure of language, of human language. I fell into that quite by accident. I had not intended to. I went to the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida, partly because I had read a book. I worked as a page shelving books in the Miami Public Library, and in my shelving days I came across a book which I read, which I just thought was one of the most delightful books I have ever read. Its title was Words and Ways of American English by a man named Thomas Piles. And he taught at the University of Florida. So I went there partly because he was there. And he ended up becoming my major professor. I took my PhD there, and so I fell into linguistics quite by accident. But linguistics, and this is the point of my story, does exactly that, right? It combines humanities and science. Most linguists nowadays want to claim to be scientists. They aren't scientists. But there is something science-like in that linguistics is interested in facts, right? And dealing with specific, concrete facts. But a good linguist does that, as Thomas Piles did, and as I have tried to do in my life, does that in terms of what is the use of these facts? What's the point of them, right? Facts alone are pointless. There's no wisdom in them. What do you do with these facts? And I happen to think that human language is enormously important, and the study of language is enormously important. I think it is one way we can become wise, right? So there's a case in academia where these opposites can, in fact, come together, as they do in at least one discipline. And then you can do that in your life, too, I think. If you're a very first-rate oriented person, then deliberately set out to cultivate orderly forms in your life. Right? Don't give in to every whim to do what you want. Read Emily Post. Read Emily Vanderbilt. You know who I mean. Right? Observe forms. They're good.
Other questions?
Wait a minute. John, you mentioned that you would make some kind of a comment about Christianity. When you were talking about it in the 6th ray, you said that you would tell us more about what...
Christianity begins, of course, as a purely 6th ray religion. It's an Abrahamic religion, right? Christianity begins in Judaism, and Judaism was very Abrahamic. That's where we get the name Abrahamic from, right, out of the Jewish tradition. But Christianity, very early in its history, in fact, were any of you here for that talk last month, I guess it was? Who was the speaker?
Ron Miller.
Ron Miller, who talked about this early history of Christianity. And when they talked about it, I said, aha, that shows the rays working. Christianity very early was taken up by Gentiles, and they were Greek Gentiles. They were in the Greek tradition. And the Greek tradition is not at all 6th ray. Very little 6th ray in the Greek tradition. It's very strongly 4th ray, right? Harmonizing things. There's some other rays in Greek culture too. But that began the conversion of Christianity out of the Abrahamic tradition into something else. And as soon as you open yourself to something else, and the 4th ray influences are very strong in this regard, because what does the 4th ray do? Harmonizes. So Christianity began then to develop a strong 3rd ray tradition, and throughout the Middle Ages, there was a great controversy between Christian scholars, between the scholastics and the humanists. And the scholastics were actually rather 5th ray. They were concerned with facts, Thomas Aquinas, very fifth rate person. Whereas the humanists were concerned with how does this fit in with human welfare, with making a good society, with making personal wholeness. And so you get then both some fifth ray and some third ray coming into Christianity. And eventually, of course, you get, especially with the scientific revolution in the West, modern Christianity is nothing like the Christianity which started. And it is what it is because of a blending of the rays. So that's what I had in mind by that.
John, I have one question that I would like to add. You have the opposites going across the circle, but it's also interesting that if one is too passionate, one loses wisdom.
Yeah,
and
sure.
if one is too stuck on the details of knowledge, one would move away from a compassionate
Yes.
view.
That's right. Yeah, if any of the rays in our lives, or our lives either individually or collectively in society, if any ray becomes dominating, it becomes the most important thing, and all of the others are neglected, we're in a bad way. And to some extent, that explains our collective problems these days. We have too many social movements that are dominated by one ray or another. We have to have a balance. And it's only in that balance that we achieve the good life, individually or collectively. Yes, sir. I think she wants to record it.
They're going to be on tape. Thank you. If you were to categorize the Da Vinci Code and the influence, what do you think is pulling in terms of Christianity and that? That's kind of a tendency to harmony, or what's your comment on that?
Yeah, of course, now I have not read the Da Vinci Code. However, what is most characteristic of that book, from what I have read about the book, is not something that Dan Brown made up. He made up very little. The basis behind that book has been around for a good many years, namely that Christ, in fact, married Mary Magdalene, and they had children, and that bloodline exists even today. That's an old concept that's been around for quite a long time. So Dan Brown didn't make it up, and that's what gets people all upset, right? Or gets some people all upset. That's what the Catholic Church is taking out a huge advertising campaign to counteract the influence of the Da Vinci Code, and that's why it's doing it, because it sees that as a threat to the basic principles of Christianity, of traditional Christianity. The church, all churches, tend to be very hierarchical, and that's sixth ray. That's been there right along. Right? Christianity has never escaped that. Oh, as some branches of Christianity have, right? Congregationalism, for example. Not much sixth ray in congregationalism. Not much sixth ray in Unitarianism. But traditional Christianity, organized Christianity, is still very strongly strict sixth ray, very hierarchical. What that theory on which the Da Vinci Code is based suggests is that the hierarchy is founded on a fiction. And so that becomes a great threat then. Yeah. I do not for a moment believe that theory behind the Da Vinci Code is real. It's a fiction too. It's just a different fiction. All right? There's no evidence to support it, whatever. But it's interesting to see these two fictions come into conflict with one another.
Two questions, each from a different person. And of course, they don't have your handouts. So the first person is Betty from Ohio. She's asking what books you recommend if she wanted to continue studying the 7 rays.
Yes, well, the one I would recommend most strongly is the one I mentioned at the beginning. That's Ernest Wood's book, The 7 Rays. However, Betty, what you want to do is to write Ruth Ann Fowler here at Alcott and have her send you a copy of the handout.
And the second question, no name, is what color could be applied to each ray?
Yes, I didn't mention that. The rays have all sorts of correspondences. I mentioned the correspondences of planets, right, for example, and with the principles of the human being. But there are also traditional colors which are associated with them. And these come out of Blavatsky, out of Blavatsky's late writings for some of her own private students. The colors are actually, she associates with the human principles. But since the human principles very clearly correspond with rays, then they become of the ray, colors of the ray as well. And unfortunately, on our projections here, for some reason, the projector distorts the colors, so if they don't come out well here. If you look at my computer up here afterwards, you'll see much better colors. The first ray color is blue. That doesn't look like blue at all, does it? But that's what it should be. The first ray is blue. The second ray is orange. The third ray is green. It doesn't look like green, but that's what it should be. Fourth ray is yellow. Fifth ray is indigo. Sixth ray is red. And seventh ray is violet. Sorry if the color projection isn't good.
Do the rays correspond?
Okay.
Do the rays correspond with like the 7 chakras?
Do the rays correspond with the 7 chakras? Yes, indeed they do, because the chakras also correspond with the principles and hence also with the rays. I am not very knowledgeable about chakras, so I can't tell you a lot about them in any detail, but actually it pretty much corresponds with top to bottom. So the crown chakra is first ray. Right? The brow chakra, no, it doesn't work quite top to bottom, because the heart chakra is second ray, or buddhi, compassion. But the brow chakra does correspond with wisdom, the third ray. The throat chakra corresponds with the 5th ray, knowledge. And the bottom ones I don't know about. Actually, I do probably. The base chakra is the 7th. And the chakra in between, which in the traditional system, Hindu system, corresponds with the sexual organs, is 6th ray. But it's also often corresponded with the spleen in some theosophical writings.